There we go. Okay, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining our Employer of Choice session today. This one is on the topic of women's safety in the workplace. And for me, this is something that I'm particularly passionate about, being a young female at work, and also something that I think there's a lot more for myself and others to learn about. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Just a few logistics before we get going. This session is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available after the session. If you don't mind just keeping mics on mute while the panel are discussing, that would be great. However, we do encourage lots of questions and comments and things like that. So please pop them in the chat box, or you are more than welcome to use the raise your hand feature, and we can pick up the questions and comments from there. And I think that is all from me. So I hope you enjoyed the session, and over to Anji.
Hi, everyone. We've got a great lineup here. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Anji Miller, and I'm a senior business manager at LifeArc. We're a healthcare charity. What I'll do is I will get our panel to introduce themselves before we start our discussion. So if I just quickly name you, and if you can just introduce yourself to the audience. We'll start with Joanne.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Joanne Conway, and I'm a diversity and inclusiveness leader at EY, which is a global accountancy firm, and I'm based in Manchester.
Krzysztof.
Oh, hi, I'm Krzysztof. I'm the founder and CEO of Braincures. Today, I'm joining the panel as with the hat of a whistleblower on organizational culture.
Kathryn.
Hello, I'm Katherine Simpson, and I'm an independent consultant. My work helps leaders at all levels in science-based organizations prepare and implement change.
Jonathan.
So I'm Jon Green. I'm at the present Chief Operating Officer of IONTAS, which is a world-leading antibody engineering CRO. Previous to that, I was the site general manager of a very large pharmaceutical site based in sunny Cambridgeshire.
And Karen. I can see you're there. No?
Hi, I'm Karen Cadwallader. I work at a CRO in Cambridge, and Jon and I actually used to work together.
We did.
Long time no see, Jon.
Yes, nice to see you, Karen.
Okay, thank you. So I think without further ado, I think what we'll do is we'll start addressing the main question, main topic for this, which is women's safety and do you feel safe? So I suppose the first thing what we should do is talk about what is safety. You know, we can come from lots of different angles. I suppose if you ask someone, do they feel safe? They can easily just say yes or no, a binary answer. But when you have a look, we're operating in unprecedented times. Women are doing a lot more. They are more independent and flexible working and travel as well. So how do we define safety? If we start with Joanne.
Yeah, hi. I think it's really interesting, isn't it, when you think about that from a safety perspective. And I, particularly in the role that I work in diversity and inclusion, we talk about safety a lot. It's around that psychological safety and how we can create an environment where people can feel like they can speak up, that they can take risks, that they can really just bring all of their ideas and be able to contribute that. And I think from a safety perspective, that's massively important. I think your point around you know, traveling and safety, I think, you know, I certainly see quite a lot in the social media as well around what do women need to do to make sure that they're safe, and what are some of the things that they need to change the way that they're working or how they behave or where they go, and put limitations on them. And certainly, you know, this correlates to the work that I do in the D&I space. Is actually it should never be about fixing minority groups, whether that's women or other communities. And I think we need to do more around actually what's happening around from an ally perspective, but also from a societal perspective. And, you know, equality starts at home, and that then feeds through into the workplace.
And I suppose, you know, if you have to conform to address your work environment, then it does impact you psychologically. Katherine, psychological safety. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on that?
For sure, and that's you know, I definitely am where Amy, where Joanne started off with the work of Amy Edmondson, I guess first coined that term of psychological safety, and it is around feeling safe to speak up and to challenge the status quo. And of course, for me as a leader and helping leaders with change, the organizations that can change most successfully are those ones where people feel comfortable in expressing their resistance to the change and their concerns about the change, so that those can be really taken into account and the organization will move forward more effectively, even though it feels very uncomfortable potentially at the time. But you know, being safe to speak up and challenge is what I define as being safe.
And I suppose, just elaborating on that, a lot of the time people are worried that if they speak up, they're going to be seen, you know, as aggressive. For example, as a Black person, it's really where the aggressive Black woman. They're worried that they're going to be labelled in some way or form. To speak up doesn't necessarily mean that you are. It's adversarial. It could be that you're just putting in your opinion, your perspective.
Yeah, and that's really important, isn't it? When there's, you know, there's different personalities in the room, and you know, there's a lot said, and it'd be interesting to get Joanne's opinion on this around, you know, diversity, and we all know how important that is, whether it's gender diversity, you know, class, different ways of thinking, different styles of leadership, all of those things. But and we know that the more diverse organizations can solve more complex problems and be more innovative and get stronger business results. But the way that that's done is through great listening and through great collaboration and feeling safe. So,
Joanne,
can I just go?
Yeah,
sort of give
absolutely,
you my
John.
on what safety is. So, I mean, safety is a basic sort of human need. For those of you who are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the second of the tier. The others, the first one being physiological, then safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And as we move up to that second level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, requirements become more complex, and people want control and order in their lives. So this need for safety and security contributes largely to behaviours at this level, and is essential for well-being. You know, and some of the basic security and safety needs include, you know, financial security, access to healthcare, health and wellness, and also what people who traditionally see as safety is safety against accidents and injury. And it's much more holistic than that. And together, the safety and physiological needs of these hierarchy make up, it's often called, you know, the basic needs, and they are. And I think, you know, to get a culture of safety within a workplace is actually essential for everybody's well-being, mental well-being and physical well-being. And the key components for the success of creating a safe and healthy working environment is actually commitment and awareness, especially from senior managers. It has to come from the top. You know, it has to be a culture that is demonstrable and lived on a day-to-day basis. And it can be, you know, it is shown by commitment from the senior managers and other senior staff to develop this healthy and safe working environment, basically through mission statements, policies, and action. You know, it's got to be managers demonstrating their commitment to implementing these strategies, making staff aware of that commitment so they can follow suit and sort of implement a health and safety and a safe culture in the working environment. You know, and a safe and healthy working environment has many, many benefits. You know, it promotes staff loyalty and pride in the workplace. It generates positive views about the business. Especially if you work in Cambridge, it's a very small environment, and word spreads fast about people who are not so good at doing this sort of thing. And it's spread by both, people who work there, clients, customers, the lot. And becoming a highly sought after environment when recruiting new staff is essential in this competitive environment. And that one of the ways you can do it is to, promote that safe environment. And it's not about, having safety inspections and audits and things like that. It is much more holistic and about sort of, a holistic sort of viewpoint. And I'll just give you a couple of examples how I used to do it on a large site that I used to manage. So one of the things we found is we were on a sort of site which had a large car park, which was actually quite remote from the main building. Fine in the summer, it was lovely and sunny, but at night, it wasn't quite such an environment that people were happy with. And so we used to provide a security escort to people who were working late, female or male, so that actually they felt safe just getting to their car. And for anybody who owns cars, especially older ones, they're not actually reliable 100% of the time. And so just one of the ways we actually promoted a sort of, a mental well-being was we always had somebody on hand with a car charger and starter. So if their car didn't start, we could actually go and help them. And those are just two very minor examples of how you promote a safety culture within an organisation. And it actually became all pervasive, and actually, it does really contribute to people's mental and physical well-being.
Thanks, Jon. I know, Krzysztof, you have a view on safety as well.
Yes, so I'll mainly speak about the experiences in the research culture. So I think it's becoming less taboo to talk about unsafe workplace culture that has a lot of bullying and harassment. So there's been a number of surveys from different societies where, for example, Wellcome Trust surveyed over 4,000 researchers. 3,000 of those were based here in the UK, and found that 43% of them had experienced bullying and harassment frequently over a year's period in which the survey was done. And then there was also several questions that asked the staff members if they would feel happy to raise their concerns. And it turns out that only 38% of people who felt comfortable raising concerns about bullying and harassment. And then there is a movement called Academic Parity, who's done a survey of about 2,000 different academics around the world. And they found that only 5% of people who raised complaints had those complaints resolved to satisfaction. And so it's a very, not say, and it's these kinds of statistics are, you could say, industry-wide. It's the whole Me Too movement, really, where for the person who complains, if it doesn't get resolved by your manager, who you typically complain first, when you go to HR, things start to escalate. When the management then doesn't do anything, when you complain to management, then you go out to external sites, which I have done, and then the external people who actually fund some of these organizations, like universities, they end up telling you that they feel that the organization, if they had covered up the activities, had done what they expected to, you sort of find that you're really shocked, I think, with especially the Wellcome Trust gets 20 whistleblowers like this every year, and they have not protected any of the whistleblowers except the Nazneen Rahman case at the ICR London, where she had the grant pulled. We need to see a lot more of that. But AstraZeneca then promoted her to the exec board, so it tells you not very good things about the research culture that should be promoted from the top at certain pharma companies. So it's, I think what's key for any person is that when you have a problem, it needs to be resolved very fast. So I got interested in this 2 years ago when my partner was pregnant, and she was actually experiencing this hyperemesis gravidarum. They call it the Kate Middleton syndrome, if we go make it very royal. And her manager was not willing to support any kind of adaptation at all. She was offering to do, what limited stuff she could do from away before Corona times, and it was not supported, and then became a whole whistleblowing case that might see daylight in the employment tribunal in February, which it doesn't have to be like that and shouldn't be like that. So what I think is really important for anyone to know is educate yourself before when you go into when you're pushed into a formal process. Because actually I think most honest workers, they will first try to talk to the manager, and if it fails, they will talk to HR. If that fails, they go up the ladder and then they seek help. But I think you need to educate yourself. There's several great charities in the UK who provide support, like Protect and Whistleblowers UK. Before you file a formal grievance, you should be speaking to a legal person, that the language used is appropriate, so that when the university is legal up against you, they're not going to be picking words. Essentially, whatever you report has to stick to the Equality Acts 2000 Act, or otherwise you're not going to get any leverage. So in my partner's case, if it hadn't been for, well, there's also ACAS that I think everyone needs to know about, and the 1752 group for harassment. They have an Anna Livaris's group. There's a lot of great resources to educate yourself before you put in a complaint. Because what happens typically is when, so actually most of the unsafe practices come from unfortunately senior management. 70% of bullies are senior managers. And so it trickles down a hierarchy, creating effects for both the person who experienced it and the people who witness it, who act as bystanders and may not feel comfortable to speak up because they know they have a reference letter. I mean, academia is a very dangerous place because of the reference letter. And so I think there's things we can do to make it safe, especially I think educate even HR and management personnel to understand that academia is not a 9-to-5 job. I think that's the starting point, and that there's a lot of flexibility. And also I think when you raise a case, definitely find allies outside of the institute, educate yourself, try to, hopefully there are a lot of, you could say, legal movements in the UK, like the calls for the office of the whistleblower, where you as the whistleblower could go to an organization that would sponsor some of your legal costs. And I think for women, since we're talking about women's safety, very interesting and strong organization to go to is a Pregnant Then Screwed, which had happened to my partner twice. So definitely read their website before, when you have any kind of, well, prior to, I think, having a problem. Because I think one of the things about workplace safety is that overall people don't recognize that some of the behaviors that in the gut feel wrong are wrong, and some are actually protected.
That does feed to basically the next point that I wanted to make, that, you know, you mentioned some of the steps that you can take to actually protect yourself. Say you do find that you are not being listened to, or you are safe and it has repercussions. But the thing is, you know, the fear, if you're not in the right culture, that does feed into the whole thing, because that will psych you out from actually highlighting anything. Katherine, did you want to mention anything with regards to that? And then also, I think, Joanne, with the sense of belonging, that you are part of an organization, and it's not something that's static. It changes. We're in different times than we were 2 years ago.
Yeah, definitely got some thoughts, but I'll hand over to Karen, and then I'll jump in after you, Karen.
So me, Katherine here.
Katherine.
Oh, Katherine, sorry. I thought Karen.
No. So I was thinking there was a couple of things of you know, that you mentioned, Krzysztof, and actually that Jon also said about, you know, the senior management and how important that is. That, you know, they do set the tone for culture. And so kind of really being clear about what behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors aren't acceptable. And, you know, working with that and everybody in the organization understanding that. Now, if you're in an individual perspective, then that's tough, isn't it? Because you kind of, you're trying to figure out, you know, how can you influence the workplace? I think the opportunity is for everyone to think about, you know, what behaviors they see as acceptable, and then within their sphere of influence, in team meetings, in one-to-one meetings, having those discussions on the explicit behaviours you think are really important. And so my belief, and it might be a bit of a naive belief, is that everybody can influence culture by talking about what the behaviours are that we're expecting in any particular situation. So it's the first piece that Jon mentioned, it's around, being aware, it's demonstrating. So that's the next piece is, if you say that this is the way it should be, then you have to role model it, whatever level you're at. And then the final thing is to reinforce it. So, if you see good behavior, call it out. If you see bad behavior, call it out. And so that's the piece there that, it's kind of a bit of a circle that, setting those behaviors, agreeing them as an organization, and then making sure that the reinforcement mechanisms are there. So I'm kind of talking more on the preventative side, I guess, of, this is what you need to do if, as an organization and as an employee of the organization.
And Joanne, if you belong to the organization, then basically they should hear you. Your needs, your safety needs can change over time. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about diversity, we're talking about the mix of people, and that can mean all the things that we've talked about in terms of the protected characteristics, as well as other things, like social style and thinking and all of those things. And inclusiveness then is about leveraging all of those differences, right? It's not enough to bring diversity. Actually, what are you doing to make sure, in terms of those inclusive behaviors, that mean that when you bring a diverse mix together, that actually you are creating an environment where people do feel free to be themselves, that they can actually speak up and not just be heard, but actually that the ideas that they have are actually taken into account. And that's really, really important when you think about the the teaming and leading inclusively helps others experience that psychological safety and trust. And then that is the output around belonging. So that's what leads to that sense of belonging. And when people have that sense of belonging, they feel motivated. We talked about physical and mental health and career outcomes as well. And belonging is, I talk to our people all of the time and have done quite a bit of research in this, and people want to be valued for their uniqueness. They want to be recognized for the individual difference that they bring, but they also want to feel like they are part of something, that they are part of a group. And Jon mentioned earlier on about this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it is a human it's human nature that we want to have that connection. And one of the things that I'd like to just build on is around the bit that we talked around whistleblowing and raising problems earlier. And if you don't have the trust, you made this point, Anji, around it's not about one thing, it's about the lived experience day to day of people in teams, so that actually when something does happen, that they feel that they can raise it, whether that's that there's been a mistake made, or that something's happened and it doesn't feel appropriate, or they don't feel happy, or they feel uncomfortable. They have to be able to feel that they can have that conversation, and the only way they'll be able to do that is if they trust somebody enough to do that. And when you look at the research on belonging, actually one of the biggest drivers of belonging for individuals is regular check-ins. So often we think that there's these big things that we're going to do, this big silver bullet to change culture, but actually it's those check-ins, those regular check-ins to just say, are you okay? It doesn't, even just before you launch into, have you got that report? Where are we on that project? Actually just saying, how are things, and really asking and really listening. And it doesn't have to be, I've got to get an hour every day with everybody on my team to make sure they're okay. Actually, you can just ping them and just check in, and then people feel like they're valued and they feel like they are part of a team, that people care. I think that gets underestimated, and actually that's a huge part of creating that sense of belonging. And when you have that, you can give that feedback. And Krzysztof, you talked as well around that, being able to speak up, and having that it's uncomfortable obviously and distressing for the individual, but also there's some research around it's as distressing for the people watching it. you know, for the people, for the bystanders, and it just can create that toxic environment. So it's really important that you create the environment where people can speak up, that you empower people, and you set in place the right infrastructure so that people do have those mechanisms, whether it's to go to HR, whether it's to make sure that they've got communities that they can speak to, or if they need to then go to that next stage, that they know what the ethics hotline is, you know, making sure that you're promoting that in your organization actually, so that it doesn't become a last resort, that people know all of the different stages that they can go through and where they can get support when they need it.
I'll just jump in there because I think it's, you know, what you've said, I agree with 100%. The problem is when the top people don't take notice of people, and I think what people need to do is make themselves aware of external sources where they can get help from. Things like Citizens Advice Bureau is one stop that everybody knows about, but you know, you won't get listened to if the top management don't want to listen, and that's one of the problems I think in the culture of a lot of organisations where, you know, CEOs who don't tend to be the most empathetic individuals in the universe, you know, just dismiss it as, oh, you know, that's just something I don't really want to be bothered about. And I think that's where culture comes in, because as I said right at the beginning, the culture's got to come from the top. I think, you know, the HR professionals within an organisation have got to try and influence those leaders to actually take notice and be empathetic to people, and create a culture of being listened to, being valued, which is, you know, equally important. If you're not valued, you don't feel psychologically sort of fit, because you just don't seem to fit in. I mean, I think that I've been to lots of management courses over the years and leadership courses. The best bit of advice I was ever given by anybody was a one-liner, and he just said that most people go to bed at night not hungry for food, but hungry for praise. And then went on to expound the fact that people want to feel valued, they want to feel listened to, they want to feel that they're doing a good job. And the easiest way to do that is just tell them. And it's really, really important. And I've never forgotten that. And you know, it is part of that mental well-being. And you create that culture of being valued, and you are more likely to actually stand your ground and tell somebody if something is not right. If there's bullying or harassment that goes on in an organisation, you've got to be listened to. And creating that culture of being valued is just equally important.
Yeah, it's such a good point, isn't it? Because that, you know, it kind of comes back to what I was saying about the reinforcement, the you know, the thank you, the caring. And I was just thinking about this McKinsey article that I read recently, and it was talking about leadership development programs. Jon, so what you were just mentioning, you know, some are good, some are bad. One of the things that it's showing is that, you know, leadership development is critical in order to have an organization where you can challenge. But the thing that they found is that it's really important to do two things before you can challenge and before you feel safe in challenging. And this also speaks a little bit to what Joanne was saying. It's about caring. So you have to care about individuals, to exhibit that. And you have to be collaborative. And so listening and involving others is really crucial. Once those two things are in place, then you can build in the challenge piece, and you can feel safe that, you know, because somebody cares for me, and because somebody's listening to me, I can challenge. And I can challenge about the direction of the organization. I can challenge about if I see behaviors that aren't working. I'm feeling safe because those two important elements are in place. And the other interesting thing about the article was that actually it was saying that those two pieces around, you know, putting those things in place and, you know, making sure that people are trained almost in that ability to be curious and ask questions, as opposed to the know-it-all, because I'm a leader and so therefore I know it all. That doesn't help. It doesn't help in terms of other people feeling safe to challenge, because You know, if you've got an idea and it's going against what your leader is pronouncing very confidently that that's the right way to go, it's really hard to raise that and to challenge the direction if you're not feeling in any way safe, because you are different in whatever dimension that can be.
But the problem is, not a lot of the leaders should not be leaders. They do not have these qualities, and unfortunately, climbing that ladder, it's not just on the fact that you have these qualities, or even if you did at the time, by the time you get there, it doesn't impact you. And to be a true leader is quite selfless. And this is clearly what we're saying, that this is one of the issues. But also, you know, if you feel unsafe, how far can you go? Should you be suggesting solutions, or should you just be raising it? Any thoughts on? Yes.
So I think in this conversation it's really important to also that people look at Margaret Heffernan's work. So she has this great TEDx's out there, like Forget the Pecking Order at Work, where she suggests at work you've got at least 3 different characters within a team: the owl, the lions, and the Saint Bernard, and you want to somehow synchronize them all together. She's also got a great talk on the dangers of willful blindness. So executives turning a blind eye to people saying, well, look, this happened and I need a solution. It's called the, you know, I think management needs to get away from the delay, defend, deny scheme, which because I think people need to be aware that typically for any problem you have in a company, you have about 3 months to raise it into ACAS for it then to go into a formal route that will usually give you a resolution, a judicial mediation or something like that. Unfortunately, that's where we're at today at most companies. And but I think, yeah, so I think there's some really great, well, I think finding good leaders who stand up against, you could say, the governance team is very difficult.
Yeah, it is a bit of David and Goliath. But one of the things I was, you know, when Jon was talking and he's giving the example about the car park, is it unreasonable to say, okay, I've seen everything in the media, there's increased harassment for women, can I be trained in self-defense? Is it unreasonable to ask for that because I'll feel safer? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, I think it needs to be individual. You know, I think the risk that we run when we make, I think what you were saying is about, can an individual ask? Then I think absolutely. I think what we need to be careful is that organizations that we don't make assumptions or these kind of sweeping stereotype generalizations around, actually, you know, we better go and protect all of these women, because actually we need to listen to what individuals want, and actually what one woman wants will be very different to what another woman wants. So I think it's about having options. I think is a really good part of that. And also, you know, we have a fantastic women's network, and within that network, obviously that's not their you know, it's not their problem to solve in terms of like anything that comes up from a diversity, inclusion or HR perspective, but what that creates, and we they obviously have a really healthy budget from us, which means that they can actually listen to our women and also think about the intersectionality of all of those members as well, and really think about, and they will put on various different things for those groups and members that resonate for them, and that changes all of the time. So what they will want this month may change to what they need in the next couple of months. So I think it is about what can you do as an organization, but also listening, you know, and not just kind of shutting that down then, you know, well, we've never done that before, so actually, no, we can't do that. Well, why not? You know, let's explore what the options are and how can we make sure that our people do feel safe.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit also about, you know, there's one, you know, some of the organizations, and thinking about the, you know, the One Nucleus audience and some, you know, smaller organizations where the need for policies and procedures and one size fits all, because it's a big organization and to have so many options might be very difficult. But the smaller organizations have the opportunity to listen to every single one of their employees in a way and understand. And in fact, the leaders, the great leaders that I've seen don't think that they have all the answers. They think that their employees have all the answers. So if there's an issue, how do we co-create the solutions? What does that look like? And how can, what would work for you in this situation, and having that conversation. So it's not just about consulting and listening, it's about co-creation. And there's the extreme scene of like great leaders as opposed to the authoritative leaders. So I am seeing that, and I was thinking, in defense of some of the leaders that I've worked with, I've seen some great leaders who really do want to make sure that they are both involving and listening to the degree of, I need you to help me to provide those solutions.
Kathryn, you made a very interesting point on policies, and I think it's very clear to me, having gone through a process, for several formal processes, the policies need to have a very strict timeline on how quickly things will get resolved, because I think reporting is not an issue these days. There's a lot of anonymous platforms where you can track how you even feel and things like that. And I think companies need to invest more and more in these different platforms. It's more of how the process then make policies with timelines, deadlines, so they don't drag on for years, and people don't get re-victimized. I think this is where how we can, can promote more safety and people being more positive work cultures.
I think one thing though, policy is one thing, practice is another, and often things fall between the gap. So should that be reviewed? Should you be actively saying, we have this policy that's in this document that I saw when I started, like how many years ago, but I've never seen it practiced?
I think policy. Oh, sorry, you go, John.
So I was just going to say, I'm slightly cynical about policies because I think they're a very useful tool, but only if people are especially managers, are trained in their use. Because I've been in organisations where the policies were published, yeah. Actually nobody really knew how to actually implement them until actually you were faced with the cold reality. You had to, and you quickly had to get up to speed on what you're supposed to do. And to me, that's useless. It's got to be the fact that if you put in place a policy, then people have got to be trained in their use, and that's people who are have to implement the policy, i.e. managers, and also the staff who may want to fall back on a policy for whistleblowing, for instance, and things like that. Yeah. Because otherwise this just becomes a paper exercise. I mean, I'd like to know how many HR departments are cognizant of the new directive on whistleblowing. I bet most aren't yet, but they're going to have to get up to speed on that. And more importantly, they're going to have to tell staff about it. And so it's a two-way street, really. It's got to be yes, it's a useful management sort of tool, but it's also got to be useful for the staff to be able to fall back on it.
Joanne, you were going to say something?
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say that I think probably similar to John, that the policies will only get you so far. I think, we absolutely need policies. Obviously, we need to have them in place, but it is about that implementation. And also it's about the lived experience, the day-to-day of an individual. When you speak to people on the ground, they're not going to refer to policies. They will tell you how they feel, and that's impacted by the behaviors around them. So obviously the policies are there to enforce, but actually, sometimes if we cannot get as far as that, where it doesn't need to get to the policies, actually, if we're having these, if we create this experience and consistently for people where we have that culture of belonging, that can make a big difference. And actually, there's some research by positive psychologist Barbara Fredkinson, and she talks about this 3-to-1 ratio, which is really interesting, and talks about the power of belonging. So for every one time that you feel like you haven't been included, whether that's that you've not been invited to lunch, or you've been left off an email, or you haven't been given that credit, like John said, you haven't had that, just well done, thank you, like such a big thing. Small things mean big things. So for every time that you feel a little bit like, actually, I don't feel valued, you need to have 3 positive interactions to counteract that one negative experience. And that really shows the power. And, you know, when I talk to our people and our leaders, you know, I really talk about, you may think that what you're doing is small, but if you do those small things every day, and everybody does those small things every day, that's what makes up the culture. That's what makes people feel safe. And that's what makes people feel like they belong. So we all need to play our part in that. And then if it does get to that stage where it's people do need to speak up, that you've created that environment where they know who to go to. You know, you've got that transparency around what the processes are, and they feel confident that they've got at least one person that they can go and share that with and raise that and escalate if they need to.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I also think people ought to take notice of, you know, great leaders like Steve Jobs. His mantra was walk the floor. Too many managers sit in their offices and actually expect people to come to them. I was not of that mould, and it was endlessly out talking to staff, whether they reported to me, were part of my department or not, just chatting to people to find out what their views are. And that's how you build up a picture of the culture within an organisation.
Yeah.
And so I'm a great supporter of walk the floor. My EEA used to get really irritated because she could never find me. I was off on somewhere on walkabout, as she used to call it. But what I was doing is I was actually doing my job as a senior leader, finding out what people's issues were. Do they feel safe? You know, have they got a problem they can't resolve? And can I help? And it's about that supportive culture that you need to implement in any organisation.
Yeah.
You can't do it by sitting in an office.
And I think that one thing about women raising issues is that they typically, if you raise it, people will say, well, you're just the only woman who's raised that issue. So so essentially, when you raise a grievance, it's very important that you say, well, actually, this is an organizational problem. Otherwise, it will be said, well, it's just your personal issue. So it's really key. It's unfortunate that for probably both male and female, if you encounter bad behavior, you end up having to have further Me Too statements that will usually get dismissed, but you almost have to build your case that this has also happened to other people before certain things will happen correctly. So I think this is an unfortunate experience. I think I'm hearing from many people.
The burden of proof sounds quite heavy. This is, and I think, you know, even if you know you're right, you know you should raise it. The fact that you've got such a long ride and the burden of proof that you're going to have to generate your case could be something that just puts you off completely as well.
Yeah.
One thing I should mention is that we conducted a survey very early on, and this has been running for a week and will continue until next Friday. And the question was just to ask, you know, the attendees and anyone who was actually looking at the content for this session, do they feel safe at work? And this is obviously for women. From the survey so far, obviously it may change slightly. 61% said that they feel safe, 13 somewhat, 7 no, and 8 unsure. Actually having a look at the gender split, you know, those who provided a definite answer, you know, it was mainly men. More of the women were really when they didn't, the percentage was lower. Do you think that that's on the basis of, you know, social media, a lot of those things that are happening, and that, you know, the harassment cases that have been highlighted? Do you think it's changing times, our working environment, because more people are working from home? Do you think any of these impact some of the responses that we're seeing or how people are feeling? John?
I'm not sure how to answer that one, really. I mean, you know, the world's changed, hasn't it?
I thought you were going to say something. That's why.
No.
I think they're going to. I think that some of it is that people or women or, you know, have felt like that. I do think people now feel that they have more of a platform to speak up, whether that's through social media, through all of the various campaigns that have been happening, and kind of like I think that there is that. But I just think that there's particularly now as people are starting to go back into the office, they're getting trains, they may be traveling late at night, and there are just things that you have to think about. You know, if you are a woman, that you potentially wouldn't have to if you are a man, and that's not to say that's the same for all men, but there are, you know, as we know from all of the statistics that are available in terms of violence and towards women. So I think that it's that type of safety that maybe just, you know, so I wasn't surprised by those results.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, the world has changed because of COVID, because by my own observation, travelling is probably less safe than it was, for the simple reason there's less numbers. So whereas you used to be perhaps in a train which was actually full, going home sort of later at night, those trains are actually now mostly empty. And I'm sure, you know, even as a man travelling, it just makes you wonder. I mean, the other aspect of where I feel unsafe is I wish people would wear bloody masks on a train, because they don't. You know, it really irritates me as somebody who's worn a mask sort of, you know, religiously for 18 months. I get on a train and 50% of the people, despite all the signs, are actually not wearing a mask. And I actually refuse to get on the underground now because of that. You know, I'd rather walk. I did it the other day. I was in London. I just couldn't be bothered to get on the tube because of it, and I just walked to my destination because I just don't feel very safe.
Yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking the same. But for me, you know, the whole fact that my health is at risk if people do not wear a mask, and that we have a virus, that, you know, we are still in a pandemic, makes me think about my safety a lot more than it would at any other time. But I can see also from an employer's perspective that they may be thinking, hey, there's flexible working and people are working from home now. So a lot of these policies with regards to making people feel more safe, we don't have to bother about that much because they're not on site.
Well, there's still a duty under the management health and safety regulations. If you're working at home, you've got to be doing it in a safe environment. I mean, how many people are working off a dining room table at the wrong height on a fixed chair, with a laptop, with no keyboard and separate screen, etc., etc.? There must be millions now, I should think. But, you know, I'm an avid social media person, and some of the things I see on Twitter about travelling just make my hair, well, my hair is not curly, but it does make my hair curl. You know, and I feel sorry for especially women travelling these days, because it's just, you know, it must lead to a level of anxiety which is just unacceptable.
Yeah.
But I think that it's quite clear that everyone's invited and can't buy my silence movements. They've really highlighted that universities are really unsafe places. And one of the solutions that Jackie Hunter has come up with, she advanced the 7 principles of for change, research culture change. And one of the principles is that funders who have the power really create a database where you'd log in issues, essentially where they would be able to identify patterns of perpetrators at institutions that they then could nip in the bud early. I think that's one of the one of the 7 principles out there. Another one being that managers are trained more, and who have responsibility for more than 5 people are trained in leadership skills, both diversity and things like that, which I think, I don't know of managers being trained like that at university so far.
But I think there's a cultural thing there, because most people who are sort of told to go to and they're usually told to go to a diversity seminar or something, you know, that you can see the massed eye rolling before they've even sort of signed on the dotted line. And actually, I think, you know, people have got to realise how important these things are these days. The world's changed. Social media is global. You know, these people just can't hide behind their sort of misogynistic sort of viewpoints. You know, people have to embrace these ideas, and unfortunately, that's a huge social, cultural issue, not just in the workplace.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, we're coming close to the end of this session. What I'd like is to hear from each of the panelists. If you had to just give one message or advice to anyone attending or listening to this session with regards to safety, what would it be? If we start with Krzysztof.
Well, so I think when you raise issues of safety, I think be ready for retaliation and educate yourself on how to raise a complaint formally through both Citizens Bureau, ACAS, Protect Charity, Whistleblowers UK, Pregnant and Then Screwed. The list of organizations that do some great stuff is very long, but educate yourself on how to blow the whistle on complaints, and then do what your gut tells you. But know that it's a very lonely place when you challenge your prevailing culture and your management doesn't do the right thing. And unfortunately, yes, so just I think be prepared of how to do a complaint so formally, and take care of your mental health, because I think build allies probably outside of the organization, because you're not going to have many friends when you whistleblow internally. Research, when you raise an issue, make sure you put it in context of how it impacts the whole organization, so it's not diminished, that it's just you. And I think most organizations these days are having surveys of how much bullying or harassment, discrimination they have. So I think, yeah, I think just take care of yourself when you raise issues, and do what feels right for you. But yes.
Thank you. Kathryn?
So if you're a manager or a team leader or a leader of an organization, really explicit about the behaviors you'd like to see in your team, co-create them with the team, and then make sure that you follow up, call them out, and create that safe atmosphere that we're all looking for.
Thanks. Jon?
So I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, that the culture comes from above, and if you are a team leader or a manager, it is your responsibility to create that culture, show empathy, and understand your team's needs. Be brave if you're not happy. If you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Joanne?
Yeah, I think I guess it's, check in with your team members for everybody. That's a big part, whether you're a leader or not. Don't underestimate that power of really checking in, and how you can create that safety and that sense of belonging for your teams. And also just really being, knowing who your allies are and who you can trust, and creating that safe space within the organization, I think is massively important. And just be human, I think is the biggest thing. Be vulnerable as a leader, and actually just understand and try and put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. I think if we genuinely could do that a little bit more, it would make such a massive difference. I think we make too many assumptions as humans. We assume that somebody's not doing something because of X, Y, and Z, or they're doing something because of X, Y, and Z. And actually, if you just had a conversation and got to know them a little bit better or more, or asked a simple question around, what do I need to know about you? What do I need to know about your personal circumstances that will mean that we can have a better relationship, I can be a better leader? And actually, you'll be surprised what you can find out, and you will save yourself. Krzysztof talked about all of those things that you may not even have to get to that stage if you just be human.
Yeah, no, for sure. From our discussion, for me, I can clearly see where communication is key, because the thing is, you just have to be open about it. But the need for empathy and creating a culture that will welcome you know, any sort of feedback or any sort of comment, but also a safe space for anyone who does highlight anything. You can see that these are definitely key to today's society for women who are going to be working at various levels, completely independent of being chaperoned or anything else like that. Jazz, I'll hand it over to you. I think we've come to the end of our discussion.
Oh, thank you guys. And yeah, thank you everybody for attending. It was such an interesting discussion. I feel like already I've got an extra little bubble of courage inside me now from just listening to you guys talk about it. So yeah, thank you. And I mean, we've floated around some links before the session. So what we'll do is we'll follow up with that and the recording. And then hopefully we'll see you all at more employer of choice webinars. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.